Terrific. Welcome, everyone. I am delighted to see you virtually for this, what I know is going to be a wonderful lecture with Professor Dr. Karina Urbach. But let me first begin by reintroducing myself. I'm Nancy Sinkoff, Professor of Jewish Studies and History, and the Academic Director of the Ellen and Joan Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life here at Rutgers. And just to remind you, this is a webinar format of Zoom, so you won't be able to see yourselves, you will just be able to see the speakers. And you can click on your view for that to make sure that you're just seeing the speaker view. You will be muted throughout the talk. If you have a question, and I hope you will have questions, please type them into the chat. I will be monitoring them, and then I will pose them to our guest. So that is the way to communicate to the speaker, not directly to her, but to me through the chat, okay? This webinar is being recorded and will be available later on in the Bildner website if you want to rehear it or share it with people, etc. It is my great pleasure, as I always say, but it's always true, to introduce my colleague and friend, Karina Urbach. Dr. Karina Urbach is a German-British historian and prize-winning novelist, and she specializes in the period of the Third Reich. She earned her PhD at the University of Cambridge in 1996, and she did her second doctorate, a Habilitationsschrift, which is required at German universities, not one doctorate, but two, and in a completely different topic. The Germans know how to make you work hard. And she completed this in 2009. She has taught at both German and British universities. She researched her latest book, about which you're going to hear, Alice's book, How the Nazis Stole My Grandmother's Cookbook, at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, which is actually where we met. The book has already been translated into 6 languages and became an award-winning documentary. She also writes a regular column, Blast from the Past, for the German Tageszeitung, and has contributed as well to the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, The Literary Review, Die Zeit, Die Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. So she is both a historian's historian, and a historian who can write for the public, which is a great asset. She has also been on TV for the BBC, the PBS, and other programs, including those based in Germany. Besides all of this, she is also a novelist and a mystery writer, and her newest book is called Das Haus am Gordon Place, or Platz, which is a historical novel and murder mystery, and it is forthcoming in German, and I imagine it will also be translated into English. And perhaps at the end, Karina can tell us a little more about her alter ego as a mystery writer. But for now, she's going to tell us about this extraordinary act of sleuthing and of culinary history and cultural reappropriation of a very important book, which was her grandmother's cookbook written in Vienna. And I will tell you later about my experience using the book. But first, Dr. Urbach, please.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It was very, very kind of you to invite me today, and meeting you at the IES in Princeton was definitely an eye-opener. I've learned a lot from you. Okay, so let's start with the cookbook. And by the way, if you are hoping for any recipes, I can't cook, and I can't bake very well either. And perhaps we can discuss that later, because Nancy, of course, is formidable and can tell you much more about Alice's recipes. Okay, so in 1913, Egon Erwin Kisch published a short story, Magdalenenheim, in which he described his visit to a Prague institution for fallen girls. The woman running the place shows the famous journalist Kisch around the building, explaining to him at length how much she despises her charges. When Kisch enters one of the workrooms, he is recognized by the girls and given an enthusiastic welcome. Egon is here. Give me a cigarette. We don't get any here. Send my regards to the boys in the bar, Brazilian. At this point, the visit comes to an abrupt end. More than 2 decades later, now in exile, Kish discovered that a certain Hansut Ham had plagiarized his short story. Hansut Ham was an ardent Nazi. He had simply transposed Kish's reportage from Prague to Hamburg. Now the girls spoke Low German and greeted their Hans rather than their Egon. For this short story, Hansut Ham was awarded 1,000 Reichsmarks in a short story competition organized by the Nazi city of Hamburg. Maybe he ought to have made more changes, for when those who eulogized his writing found out that they had honored a Jewish composition, Ham got into trouble. He lost the 1,000 Reichsmark. But for potential Nazi plagiarists, the affair was very instructive. Narrative texts, it seemed, were not ideal for stealing. For despite all the burned books, too many people remembered the original stories. It was far better to steal non-fiction books. The Aryanization of books is a subject that has not been investigated until now. There is not even an agreed term for the process. Nobody has yet systematically explored the intellectual theft of the work of Jewish authors and publishers. There are no statistics relating to the approximate number of those affected. The subject simply doesn't appear in research. Paradoxically, the book burning of 1933 is one of the reasons for this. The campaign, this Nazi campaign, seemed to have solved the problem, as books by unwelcome authors and by Jewish authors, unwelcome I mean politically unwelcome, and by Jewish authors, were simply destroyed. The matter seemed settled. Books are burned and forbidden. At least we thought this was the case. In fact, something much more sinister went on. I stumbled on it by pure chance. My Jewish grandmother, Alice Urbach, was a well-known cookery writer, but from 1938 onwards, her books were published under another author's name, Rudolf Rösch. I had no idea how this had happened and who this man Rösch was. It was a riddle I wanted to solve. But first of all, perhaps I should explain who Alice Urbach was. And perhaps, Sarah, you could show the second picture and the second slide there. Yes, thank you. So this is Alice and her sister Helene. Alice is sitting on the bench. She was born to a well-to-do Jewish family in Vienna, and her father, Sigmund Meyer, was a local politician fighting at the time the anti-Semitic mayor of Vienna, Karl Lueger. He's quite famous. He was, unfortunately, famous. But her father also fought Theodor Herzl. So while Herzl believed in Zionism, Sigmund Meyer favored assimilation. And you can see this in the picture because Alice, she's seated on the bench, and her sister Helene behind her are wearing these dirndls, these very Austrian traditional outfits. So they are very Viennese women, completely assimilated. And Helene is a keen skier. Alice is also into all these kinds of winter sports. And Helene later becomes a lawyer, and that she would die in a ghetto in 1942 seemed unthinkable at the time when this photo was taken. These are just two Viennese ladies. Unlike her studious sister, Alice was not considered to be much of an intellectual. Since the age of 5, she wanted to become a cook. But of course, her father looked down on such a profession. At the time, an upper middle class girl did not open a restaurant or tea shop, and that was her biggest dream, to open something like the Sacher or the Daimel in Vienna. Instead, she was married off to a doctor, to Max Urbach. And on paper, this Urbach seemed quite an ideal husband, but he turned out to be a gambler and a womanizer, and it was a disastrous marriage. When her husband died in 1920, Alice was relieved in some way. But she had 2 small children to look after, no money, and no confidence. However, she remembered her passion, cooking. So after the First World War, there were great food shortages in Austria, but this changed by the mid-1920s. People wanted to indulge themselves again. Alice started to cater for her sister's dinner parties, and her menus were such a success that society ladies asked her for cooking classes. Overnight, Alice became very entrepreneurial. She opened a cooking school and in 1925 wrote her first cookbook. She gave lectures on healthy nutrition and organized cooking exhibitions. Because Alice was interested in international trends, she was also the first person to offer delivery service for ready prepared meals in Vienna. What we consider perfectly normal today was something new at the time and highly praised by the Austrian press. In 1935, she was approached by a German publishing house, the Ernst Reinhardt Verlag. And they commissioned her most famous cookbook, a 500 pages book. It's not just a cookbook, it's what in America is called home economics. It's about housekeeping, it's advice on all fronts in the house. It was called So kocht man in Wien, Cooking the Viennese Way, with an exclamation mark, because Alice talked in exclamation marks and the title needed that. It was an instant bestseller. For once, everything in Alice's life went well. Her oldest son, Otto, my father, became an exchange student in America. He went to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and her younger son, Karl, studied medicine in Vienna. But of course, as you all know, in March 1938, everybody's life in Vienna changed overnight. The Nazis annexed Austria, and her son Karl was thrown out of the university, and Alice lost her work immediately. And this is the important bit, she received a letter from Hermann Jung, the head of her German publishing house. Up to that point, Hermann Jung had had no problem publishing Alice's book. She was a foreigner, an Austrian citizen. But now all Austrians became Germans. And that meant the Nuremberg racial laws were applied to her, which meant German publishing houses could no longer publish Jewish authors. I mentioned earlier that in 1933, the Nazis had burned books by political opponents and Jewish writers. We know that. But the publishing houses had no interest in burning bestsellers. Non-fiction books were amongst the most successful genres in the Third Reich. It was therefore more profitable to find ways to continue publishing them, and one such way was simply to steal them. This was a logical step in a country where Jews had gradually lost their legal protection since 1933, and their intellectual property, just like their material assets, was now at the mercy of others. It meant that every Aryan in commas, author and publisher could now help themselves to this intellectual property without having to fear the consequences. An internal document by a German publishing house stated, for example, point 1, when reprinting, check if author is Aryan according to the Nuremberg laws. Point 2, for books written by non-Aryan authors, check whether reprint can be authored by an Aryan. So at the time, Alice had submitted 2 more manuscripts to her publishing house, one on healthy nutrition and one on desserts. Very good one. In September 1938, this publishing house now sends her a declaration. She is asked to give away her copyright to all 3 manuscripts. And she signs this contract under duress. From now on, her books are published under man's name, Rudolf Rösch. And perhaps, Sarah, could you show picture 3, please? There are the 2 books. On the left, there is Alice. The typeset is very normal, 1920s. And then on the right, there is Rudolf Rösch, and it's, yeah, it looks worse. And could we have a look at picture 4, please, just to see the first page of Alice's book, So kocht man in Wien. And that's from 1936. And then please, the next picture, that's Rudolf Rösch. And of course, this is the Nazi version. Okay, so of course I asked myself, who was this Rudolf Rösch? And on this page here that we can see, Rösch is described in German as the established master chef and a member of the Reich Food Agency. Of course, I went to all the archives in Germany, and the German Federal Archives in Berlin did not turn up Rudolf Rösch attached to this Reich Food Agency, nor was there a Rudolf Rösch in the Reich Chamber of Literature, and you had to be in a Reich Chamber of Literature if you wanted to publish under the Nazi regime. So Rudolf Rösch is not an uncommon name. And in Germany and in Austria, or the new Ostmark, which it was called now, there were many Rudolf Röschs who were members of the Nazi party. Their professions were noted on their membership card. So I looked through all that. So they are included clerks, laborers, drivers, locksmiths, and even a major general. So all kinds of professions. All these people are called Rudolf Rösch. But only one Rudolf Rösch of the right age had an Austrian background. And he was from Salzburg and was in the German army from 39 to 45. So I thought, okay, that can't be him. And when we did our documentary, when my director, she even phoned every Rudolf Rösch in the phone book in Germany, because she thought perhaps he is named after his grandfather. I made her phone them because I thought, okay, if they hear my name, they might not pick up. Anyway, we couldn't find this Rudolf Rösch. We found one who had published a recipe once, but that's it, nothing else. So was this Rudolf Rösch a pseudonym? I'll come to that back. I'll come to it later because it's one of the many theories we developed. Was it a pseudonym that was invented by the publishing house? And the other question that I asked myself was, of course, was Alice the only victim of such a theft? And once I started looking, I found more cases. I found stolen law books, stolen physics books, and medical books. Lots of non-fiction books, of course. As I said earlier, they are easier to appropriate. And one of the most spectacular cases relates to a book that is very famous in Germany. It's a medical encyclopedia, Knauer's Medical Encyclopedia. It doesn't mean much to Americans, I guess, but this is a book we all grew up with in Germany. It's a practical reference book. And it first appeared in the 1930s. And whenever you have a blister or a sore throat, you look it up in that book. And its creator was a Jewish doctor called Joseph Löbel. He was stripped of his editorship when war broke out. And deleting his name required a large dose of chutzpah, because Löbel was famous in his time. He published brilliant, witty articles in newspapers in Berlin, Vienna, and Prague, and he wrote a number of best-selling books on popular medicine. He was advising on vitamins very early on. He was in cancer research. He was so well known. His books were translated into 16 languages. He is even a figure in Joseph Roth's famous novel Radetzky Marsch. So this very, very famous Löbel is suddenly erased. And in 1940, a man called Peter Heron takes over the encyclopedia. He is now becoming the editor. And Heron was a pseudonym of a very average Nazi doctor called Volkmann, who immediately Aryanizes this book. He takes over Löbel's book, and it is very similar to Alice's book, because in Alice's book, certain Jewish-sounding dishes are taken out and Aryanized or Germanized with German names. And this happens now in this medical book, you know, things like entries like hereditary health and race are suddenly added, and other entries like homosexuality or prison psychosis are deleted, and they even delete megalomania. So, okay, this Heron Volkmann, this guy has an outstanding record in Aryanizing Jewish books. He Aryanizes another doctor's book as well, another very famous medical journalist, Dr. Walter Gutmann. And at the end, Gutmann and Joseph Löbel lose their life's work. It's their identity, of course. They are robbed by the same man, and they both commit suicide. This thief, on the other hand, has an amazing post-war career and keeps publishing until his death, and is celebrated as the author of these medical books. So the same will be the case with the man who stole Alice's book. But of course, Alice didn't know about all this at the time. She had absolutely no idea what was going on. She signed this declaration because she just wanted to get out of Austria. She would have signed anything to get out. And so she leaves Vienna in 1938. And she is very lucky because the British government at the time had the idea to help refugees by giving them domestic permits, what the British call domestic permits. And I think by domestics, they mean staff. You know, they give you a visa, but you have to work in the house. You have to work as a, you know, cleaner, cook, you know, just domestic work, nothing academic or more demanding. So Jewish women were allowed to enter Britain if they agreed to this. And between 1933 and 1939, 20,000 Jewish refugees from Germany and Austria managed to survive thanks to these permits. And Alice, of course, wants to work as a cook. And I think in my book, this is the comic relief. That's the funniest bit, because her first job is for a very eccentric lady, a millionaire called Violet van der Elst, who owned a country house or castle near Grantham. And Grantham is it's quite famous only for one thing, because Margaret Thatcher was born there. But interestingly enough, Margaret Thatcher, the former British Prime Minister, grew up as a refugee as well. So her father took in a Jewish refugee. So I'm not sure whether Alice ever ran into Margaret Thatcher, a very young Margaret Thatcher at the time in Grantham, but she was lucky to get, of course, this job in the country house. And she wasn't so lucky with her employer, because the lady, this Violet van der Elst, was pretty tough to her staff. So she hurled objects at them occasionally, and woke them up at 4 in the morning because she wanted her bedclothes changed. Anyway, Alice appeared safe now. But she knew that she had not escaped Vienna altogether because her younger son, Karl, was still waiting for his affidavit. And while her son was stuck in Austria, Alice could not be free. And when she was cooking dinner for Mrs. van der Elst in November 1938, she finds out that her son Karl has been arrested on 10th November during the pogrom. The pogrom was one, the Kristallnacht, or broken glass, as it's euphemistically called, because it's not just broken glass. Anyway, in Austria, it was one day later than in Germany. In Germany, it starts on 9th of November, and in Austria on 10th. So he gets arrested, gets beaten up, and he gets sent to Dachau concentration camp. And Alice finds this out while she is cooking his dinner in the castle. And she, of course, immediately tries to appeal to her employer to help. And this eccentric lady says, oh, yes, okay, I will help you to get your son out of Dachau. I'll write a letter to him. So Alice later on said, well, I'm sure she never wrote this letter, because this letter would have made everything worse. She is lucky in some ways because, and that's explained in my book at great length, because she gets, together with American friends of her other son, Otto, she gets Karl out of Dachau. That was still possible at the beginning of 1939. So he does get out of Dachau, and he, in the end, after lots of adventures, makes it to America. So Alice is so thankful about that her son is released and safe, that she wants to do something useful too. And she is fed up with doing this cooking for a spoiled millionaire. So when she is asked to look after refugee children who came with the Kindertransport to Britain, she immediately says yes. And perhaps we can have a look at these children. That's Sarah, could you slide 6? Could we have slide 6? Ah, yeah, okay. So Alice starts a new career as a matron, that's what they call them, housekeeper matron, at Newcastle, first at Newcastle, and then later they move to Lake Windermere. So Alice took over this job in the summer of 1939. And some of the children you see here, I mean, they look very happy and positive, but of course it wasn't so easy running this home. And there were lots of problems coming up, because these children, when they found out that their parents wouldn't join them, and when war broke out, many of them were very upset and developed lots of psychological problems. There was bedwetting, there was stealing, etc., etc. And at one point, Alice took one of the children to her Viennese acquaintance, Anna Freud, and Anna Freud being, of course, the famous daughter of Sigmund Freud, who Anna Freud ran a children's home in London at the time, and also tried to help traumatized refugees. We are now going to see a short clip, because there is one girl, and she's in the back row here of the photo. She is, yeah, okay, let's see the clip first from the documentary where I'm interviewing her. Thank you, Sarah.
And I wanted to know more about your time here.
I came on the 24th of August with the last Kindertransport from Vienna, 8 days before my 10th birthday.
And you celebrated your 10th birthday in the hostel?
Yes, I was a week in the hostel, and in the morning all the sirens went off. It was a Sunday, I was still in bed, and we all got up, and I said, music for my birthday. And the girl said, are you stupid? That's not music, that's a siren. We never had heard a siren in Vienna.
So what was it like? I mean, how was Alice? Alice and Paula Sieber were running this hostel. So what were they like?
Oh, Mrs. Urbach was 100% organized. She was the stricter person. Mrs. Sieber was softer. I'm ever grateful for their education, for their taking care of us, for them, these two ladies, teaching us to be personalities, to be people, to think of others.
And could you tell me more about the kitchen? I mean, did you work in the kitchen? Did you learn cooking?
Each one of us had their duty in the kitchen. And each one of us had their duty on Friday, on Thursday, to help make the cakes. Every Thursday, yeast cake was made. Till today, every Thursday, I make yeast cake.
Alissa's mother is stuck in Vienna, but her father manages to escape the Nazis. He joins the British Army and regularly visits his daughter in the children's home. Another girl's father has also managed to escape. Alice teaches him to cook so that he can find a job nearby. The girls are starting apprenticeships. Alissa wants to become a dressmaker. When she cycles home in May 45, everybody is waiting for her.
I came home and all the girls were standing there. You have a telegram, you have a telegram. The two ladies were sitting with the telegram, with a cup of water, with a tranquilizer. The telegram was from the Red Cross in Sweden, addressed to my dad, to the army. I'll read it to you. Your wife saved. Arrived here, Red Cross transport from Germany. Her health good. Red Cross Sweden. I was the only one.
It is the only positive telegram that arrives at the children's home. Alice realizes she has not been running a children's home, but an orphanage. And she now has to explain to the children what has happened to their parents. Alice also receives tragic news. Her 3 sisters have been murdered. Helene in the Lodz ghetto. Her older sisters Caroline and Sidonie were gassed by the Nazis in Treblinka. In her memoirs, Alice mentions this in only one sentence. She writes that the two clung to each other in death. Of course, she has no proof of this embrace, but it helps her a little. Alice had always allowed the girls to go to the cinema, but now films about the liberation of the concentration camps are shown there. She expressly forbids the children to watch these films. One of the girls sneaks into the cinema anyway. She faints right after the film starts. The local policeman takes her back to the children's home in his car. It is not only concentration camp films that reach Windermere. Children arrive who were liberated from concentration camps. The boys are placed in a separate children's home.
After the war, boys from concentration camps came to Windermere and a hostel was opened up for them. And the ladies, Mrs. Urbach and Mrs. Sieber, told us not to get in touch with them. You don't know who they are, what they went through. Don't talk with them. But standing in queue, waiting for the ticket, they spoke English, we spoke English. It didn't take long. Each one of us had a boyfriend.
You look wonderful. And I wanted to know
Okay,
more about...
I think now we have to stop it. Can we stop it? Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so as you can see, I hope you can hear me again. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks, Sarah. So, as you can see, Alissa is a wonderful, very cheerful lady, and the reason why I thought we should have a look at this clip is because she is, of course, at the moment in a very difficult situation, living in Israel. She lives in Betterwood, which is a very small, little village, and it's not bombarded, but of course, her children and her children are too old, but her grandchildren are in the army. So it is very, very tricky, and I have a lot of admiration for her. It is awful for a lady of her age now, 94, to fear for her life again, and that is why I thought we should have a look on what a wonderful, and impressive lady she is. Okay, so the Jewish Committee raised enough money in 1946 to send most of these children to distant relatives, and that meant that Alice could finally go. And there she is. There's Alice sitting in America next to my father, the adventurous Otto. And so she was reunited with her children and finally made it to America. But she's homesick, and she still wants to find out what happened in Vienna. And she misses Vienna. So in 1949, 11 years after she had fled the city, she goes back to her hometown again. And one day on her wanderings through Vienna, she passes a bookshop. And in 1949, shop windows in Austria had little on display. But one title immediately caught her eye, and she went in and picked up the book, and surely that was her cookbook. And it was her text, it was her photographs, but there was an unfamiliar name on the cover, and that name was Rudolf Rösch. So that's when she finds out that a certain Rudolf Rösch is now publishing her book or owning her book. And from then onwards, she is obsessed with getting this book back. You know, she has lost most of her friends in Vienna, of course. She has lost her sisters, but this book becomes sort of symbolic to her. So she writes to the owner of the publishing house. She writes to Hermann Jung, and here's a quote: "Seeing So kocht man in Wien made me feel very strange. Can I now get my rights back to this title?" And his responses to her letters have not survived, but he seems not to have answered her question. And for 2 years, Alice bombards him with letters, and she asks again in the 1950s, "Can't you do anything to restore my name? After all, it is my work." And in 1953, she wrote, "The Aryan edition of the book is in the window of every bookshop. You can imagine that it breaks my heart, especially when every bookseller says this is the most popular cookbook. People hardly ever ask for or buy anything else." But in Jung's eyes, the 1930 arrangement, you remember the declaration she signed, is legally binding. So was it legally binding? Of course, to take contracts signed after the implementation of the 1935 Nuremberg laws are no longer legally recognized and fall under the law of compensation of victims of the National Socialist regime. So yes, Alice could have sued the Ernst Reinhardt Verlag, but in the 1950s, this law didn't exist yet. And it would have been, if she had sued him, a costly, drawn-out process and emotional torture for her. And she didn't have the money to sue him. So her publisher continued to be the sole earner from Alice's books. And in 1966, they granted one last license. I mean, this Hermann Jung granted one last license, this time to the Forum Verlag. And I think that's photo 8. It's the cover of the 1966 edition. Yes, look, it's, yes, that's perfect. So kocht man in Wien, 1966. It's still Rudolf Rösch, and it's a bit more colorful, but hasn't changed. Alice decided not to be a victim. She stops her letters to the publisher, and she instead starts her life in America, and she cooks for handicapped people. She gives cooking classes in San Francisco, and in the end, she even appears at the age of 95 on American television as the oldest cooking teacher in America. And that's the last photo. That's her photo 9. That's her in her San Francisco cooking school, giving, of course, Viennese cooking classes. So she dies in 1983. And she would have been very surprised to learn that there was a last twist in this whole story. Because when I published my book about her and about Aryanization of Jewish authors' books, it caused a bit of a stir in Germany. And there was an article in the Spiegel, which is our political, quite well-known magazine in Germany. Anyway, so they had an interview. They told Alice's story, and suddenly the management of the publishing house of the Ernst Reinhardt Verlag contacted me. Before that, whenever I asked them for, can I see your archive, etc., they said, sorry, we don't have an archive. Very, very sorry, but no, there's nothing. We don't know anything about your grandmother. All of a sudden, they changed their tune, and they said, yes, okay, we are very sorry this happened. And they published an apology. So they wrote, after the war, Alice Urbach suffered from the fact that her work did not appear in its original edition with her name. We consider the behavior of the publishing house back then to have been morally indefensible. So my family, my cousin and me, did not want any financial compensation from the publisher, but we achieved something much more important. Within a few weeks after this scandal with the Spiegel, the rights were returned to us, and the Ernst Reinhardt Verlag reprinted the 1935 edition. So I have it here. Not sure whether you can see it. Can you see me? Because I can't. I have no. Okay. Yes. So this is the reprint of the 1935 edition. And we got 100 copies of it made, and they were sent to German and Austrian libraries, and they, free of charge, of course, and they now have the original Alice book, and which meant that almost 40 years after her death, Alice is once more the author of her own book. So that was a big success story for us. Thank you for listening. Thank you. And now I hope you have lots of questions.
Yes, so I'm going to pose the questions that I've received in the chat. And I also sent to Sarah Portilla the picture of the Linzer tort, but we can discuss that at the very end. So a couple of people just had questions, and I think it would be wonderful for you to clarify the comment you made about home economics and the cookbook and what kind of food was in it. Yes. And I described this book as, hey, not yet. There's the Linzer tart.
Wait. Oh, I'm getting hungry. Oh,
yeah, put that Linzer tart away.
Beautiful.
Not right now. That, you know, I described the book as sort of the joy of cooking. You know, that would be the standard American cookbook. So people are wondering, a lot of people wonder, because your grandmother was of Jewish origin, was it a Jewish cookbook or a Viennese cookbook? And how can you reflect on that in terms of who she was and the experience of Austrian Jews? And then to add to that, this issue about the home economics, which I think is really fascinating, the way cookbooks in those moments are not merely about, how shall we say, feeding people, but about women's culture, domesticity. So those are sort of two questions from the audience. Yeah.
Yes. So first of all, it is not a Jewish cookbook. It is very international. So it starts off in the introduction. She already says that she wants to write a cosmopolitan cookbook, and that's something, of course, that is immediately erased by Rudolf Rösch. I mean, the introduction he completely replaces, because she says in her introduction, "Oh, the Habsburg monarchy was so international. We have so many influences from Italian, from the Hungarian, from even French, etc. We are so international, and this cookbook is going to reflect that." So she has this idea that she wants it cosmopolitan, that she wants all these mixtures. But of course, she has Jewish recipes in there too. So that's something that Rudolf Rösch then takes out. She has, for example, a Rothschild tart, or Rothschild omelette. Yes, she talks about a Rothschild omelette, and the Rothschild omelette is then, of course, Aryanized or Germanized, and it's becoming an omelette nature. And so these things are Jewish in origin, and of course, when she later on goes to the children's home, she has to just cook kosher, and she can do that. But the cookbook is a mixture of everything. So she wanted to appeal to everyone. So it has these really heavy things in it, that typical Viennese desserts that we love so much, and they are killers, of course. But she also has these very nutrition, this healthy cooking, etc. And that's why, the home economics, that's important as well. This is not just about recipes. So her book is 500 pages, and half of it is very interesting from a cultural point of view for us today, of course, because she says it's almost a bit of feminism in this book, and that's something that Rösch takes out as well, because she says, well, yes, women are in charge of the house, and they are in charge of the money, and that's what she thinks, at least. They have to be thrifty. They have to think of where to save, what to buy, and how to invest, and carefully. And so she really gives lifestyle advice. Don't waste your money on the wrong things. That kind of stuff is in the book as well.
So it's what we might call sort of a how-to. It's
yes.
And by the way, for the audience, Dr. Urbach's research about the cultural appropriation and quote unquote Aryanization of this book is really path-breaking. But there has been, I'd say, for maybe 20, 25 years, in the scholarship on culture, much more interest in cookbooks. And, Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet, who is a great historian, ethnographer of Eastern Europe, has a voluminous collection of cookbooks. The Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe College has the largest collection of cookbooks. And we now see them as great artifacts for understanding women's culture and the changing nature of gender. So the idea that she sees cooking as a kind of livelihood for young women is, this gets dismissed in the post-war years, but it's actually very important. It did give young women independence, and she herself, Alice, was independent because of her skills. So, and of course we have Julia Child, and so it's like everything very complicated, but really, really fascinating. So a couple of very quick questions. People want to know what happened to her dessert cookbook. I would like to know about that. And people also want to know what happened to the reappropriated, culturally obscured medical books. Were those restored to their rightful authors?
Yes, no, very good questions. Yeah, so her, Rudolf Rösch publishes her dessert book as well. You can still find it in the libraries, in German libraries, under his name. That hasn't been changed. The the other books, and we have become a sort of network now, because I have met by researching which other books were stolen. I have met, of course, historians who study history of law, and medical historians and so on and so forth, and they have told me, oh yes, I have a case as well. So we are sort of collecting these cases now. And for example, with the medical books, with this poor Josef Löbel, his children were never compensated. They died. Nobody ever fought for him. And that's the case with so many of these stolen books, because people were either killed in camps, or their children were scattered all over the world and never knew that they should have, fought perhaps to get these books back. But no, I mean, Alice is the only one. And this Josef Löbel book, he has never been made by this very famous German publishing house. He has never been made the author of his own book again. And that's something which I find absolutely scandalous. And we're still working on that.
Right, right. Well, I mean, you have other things that you're working on, but this and these issues of restitution can go on for years and years and years in, the copyright, the way the legal profession can protect, in this case, thieves.
Yes.
So people would like to know if they can have access to the documentary. What is its title? Is it available for public streaming? Can you tell us about the documentary?
Oh, that's very kind to us. Yeah, well, it is called Alice's Book, and it was shown at a few American film festivals, but it has never been on American television, unfortunately. There's still hope. It was on French, German, and Austrian television. So unfortunately, it hasn't been shown in America yet. So I hope that will still happen. But thanks for asking.
Well, we have we have a Rutgers Jewish Film Festival. So, and Sarah Portilla is instrumental. So who knows? Maybe we can figure that out.
That would be great.
There are two other terminology, sort of little bit meta questions that I would like to pose. I think it's very important that people hear it carefully. You qualified, and I know this is the newer way of thinking about it. Kristallnacht, historically, November 9th, 1938, and then November 10th in Vienna, was given this kind of mellifluous name, the night of the shattered glass. It sounds rather evocative. But today, we call it a state-sponsored pogrom. So could you say something more about that, and also about the very term Aryanization, which you put in quotation marks? Can you talk to our audience about why that's terminology that you as an historian are, feel needs to be thought about? Yeah.
Absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Of course, it's the night of the broken glass sounds really ridiculous, and because it has this romantic idea, broken glass. It wasn't broken glass. It just, of course, there was shop windows, synagogues, etc., smashed and burned, and but of course there were lots of people arrested, beaten up, and killed during these nights, and so pogrom is it's a much better term. Talking about Aryanization, yes, that is a term that is debated very much in Germany, because it is not a legal term. So it is a term that hadn't been used by the Nazis in any of their legal code books. But of course, it was, people did use the word when they talk to each other. They said, well, we Aryanized this factory, or we Aryanized this Klimt painting, etc. That's what, of course, nowadays, when we talk about all these stolen goods, then we think of things like The Woman in Gold with Helen Mirren, that famous film. We think of all these very valuable things, but of course, very simple things were Aryanized or were stolen as well. Aryanization is pure theft, really. You could say it's theft. Yes.
So on that note, people are curious as to why you and your sister did not seek financial compensation. Why did you not pursue that?
Well, Yeah, that's my cousin. Yeah, my cousin.
Oh, your cousin. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's no. Yeah, Alice had two granddaughters, and that's my cousin actually who lives in America. So she's American, and I'm German. So my cousin Katrina and we decided, yes, what is more important to us is that she becomes, the author of her own book again. And that was something we could achieve very quickly with the publishing house. If we had sued them, if we had gone through all these legal, oh God, it would have been awful. And that was not what we were after. We weren't after revenge. We just wanted Alice to be the author again. And that was, and in some ways, the CEO of the publishing house was quite good about that, because she could have said, "Rule, prove it, show me what rule in 10 years time we meet in court or something," and she didn't. She was quite generous in the end, giving us the book back. I thought it was generous. Some people tell me, no, you should have been tougher. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I admire your decision. It's unfortunate. It sounds like there are other works of hers and other people who deserve the same recognition. And but again, that's an enormous amount of work. Let me just see if there's other questions. Someone wants to know how you spell, just their clarification, Dr. Lobel's name. Can you just...
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, that's a bit difficult because of the umlaut. So it's L and then it's
L-O with an umlaut, yes? Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's B-L. So Josef Löbel. And his first name is G-O-S-E-F, Josef Löbel. And
it's not Joseph, it's J?
J for Jonathan. Yeah, J.
Yeah, I got it. I got it.
Josef Löbel. Yeah,
right.
That's right.
So
that's right. Yeah, and that's okay.
About the recipes, the only thing that I can tell everyone that I don't have the book, but I did a simple Google search and the recipe for the Linzer tart came up in one of your talks, I don't know, and because I love Viennese cooking, not cooking, I like Viennese baking. I've never met anything with almonds and chocolate and raspberry jam I didn't like. So I went ahead and I made the Linzer tart. And it's very interesting recipe because it has to cure, which I had never seen. You put kirsch in it, which is a liqueur, and you actually, it can like sit for weeks in your pastry cellar that of course I don't have, but it was fascinating to me and it came out great. So I will make it again. It's like everything Austrian, very, very rich, lots of butter, but European butter is marvelous. So I was very happy to make it. And many people hope that the book will somehow get translated into English. I don't think that will happen. There is another cookbook, just for your interest, and some of people might know this, is a rather famous, for those of us who do Eastern Europe, a vegetarian cookbook by Fania Lavando. She had a vegetarian restaurant in Vilna. She also escaped to England. She also taught cooking to women. So that same historical context of women using their domestic skills to help. And this book was reissued by the Evo, translated. The problem is you don't want to make that food anymore. It's extremely heavy. Yes. In terms of Eastern Europe, it's very potato and carbohydrate centered. This and like Viennese cooking is very rich with milk and cream and butter, and it doesn't suit the palate of most of us today. So it's more historically of interest than it is in a culinary way. But nonetheless, a fantastically researched project. Before I close out, can you tell us something about your forthcoming novel, Murder Mystery, and whether or not you anticipate it getting published in English?
Well, yeah, it will only get translated if it's a success in Germany, so I have to keep my fingers crossed. But it is about my my father in some ways, because in my book, in my Alice book, I describe his secret life. You know, he was working like many immigrants for the counterintelligence corps, and he came over to Austria in 49, and then he did some secret work in Austria. So it is a murder mystery set in Austria in 49, and yeah, I hope it will get translated.
So actually, one sidebar question. I do, you know, many male Jewish children from German lands and Austrian lands, when they got to England, they were considered enemy aliens and sent elsewhere before the British understood what an asset they were. Leah Garrett, who gave a talk for us a year ago, talks about X-Troop. You know, these were commandos Jewish commandos in the British Army. But what about the women? Was that typical that women would be considered enemy aliens or not so?
Yeah, no, in my Alice book, I have a chapter about her brother Felix, who was an enemy alien, and he was sent to the Isle of Man. And I actually went to the Isle of Man and checked this out. And there were only men. I mean, there were a few women in prison, but mostly it was men. Well, yeah, for a year or so, they had to live in these circumstances. And then the British finally recognized, oh my God, they are such an asset, and we can use them for our intelligence work and in the army, of course. So so Alice's brother Felix got out, and she was lucky. She was never she immediately gets a special permit because she's doing social welfare work. I mean, helping refugee children. So she was never in danger of being arrested as an enemy alien.
Right. But it's also very, for me, you know, and I know for you, is so there's a gendered element to this refugee status. And we know this today. I mean, we know this today, you know, Ukrainian women can get out of Ukraine, the men can't. Hostages that are freed are women and children. This gendered idea of who is or less or more vulnerable and who is less or more an asset. It's very gendered, and the men obviously were seen as more threatening to the British. Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, Dr. Urbach, Karina, thank you so much. I hope everyone will Google everything to find you. You've given some other talks. I know that, and they're wonderful as well. And the documentary, someone said, is available on YouTube. Maybe you don't know that. I don't know that.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh God, someone
put it on said it's available on YouTube.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
For our audience, I want to remind you that the second class on assimilation and racial passing, being taught by Donovan Ramon, is this Wednesday from 7 to 8, and he's focusing on Philip Roth's The Human Stain. So I hope those of you will continue. And then next week is the third part when he's talking about Nella Larsen's novel from the Harlem Renaissance, Passing. And we, of course, will have a full roster of great programs in the spring. And so just look out in your emails for the e-blast and our publicity. And of course, we hope to see you both in person and virtually. And I'd love everyone to raise a cyber hand for my colleague and friend, Karina Urbach. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It was
great. I hope to see you. I hope to meet you.
Yes.
Bye. Good day, everyone.
Thank you, Nancy. That was all of you and Sarah, thanks for helping with all of this technology stuff. You did it perfectly. And Robin, of course.
Thanks so much. We're gonna, I will end the recording and wrap up. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.